When most people hear the word Passover, the first word that comes to mind is usually not Christian. Normally they think Jewish. And yet, Passover isn't restricted to the Jews. There's actually a better Passover that's described in the New Testament. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul described Passover as Christian. And so when you think of the Passover, I think you have to understand what Christ's intent was on the Passover. What was it all about? Well, when you find how he instituted that Passover, 1 Corinthians 11, Paul points it out very clearly what Christ taught him. And he says, verse 23, I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you. So what Christ taught Paul, he gave to his church. So he points out very clearly the Passover is Christian. And of course, Christ changed those Old Testament functions of Passover and gave us the bread and the wine, representative of his body and his blood. And so Paul points that out, that the Passover is Christian the way that Christ instituted it the night before his death. And in fact, the way that he says it in chapter 5 of 1 Corinthians, he tells us that we are to celebrate the Passover. In fact, he doesn't stop there, because immediately after Passover, we have unleavened bread. And unleavened bread also is one of those festivals that sounds very Jewish. You could turn to Leviticus 23, where it lists all those Jewish festivals. And yet, Paul says, it's not Jewish. It should be Christian. New Testament Christians should keep the Passover and should keep unleavened bread. Now here's one, if you haven't thought of, that you should look up. Take a note of this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and in verse 8. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. Therefore, let us keep the feast. And then he says, not with the old leaven, nor the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So do we allow the Word of God to teach us some symbolism behind what we eat during this time? For a Christian, the answer is not a question. The answer is really an exclamation that, yes, Passover and unleavened bread are absolutely Christian. If you're not sure about it, check out the Word of God and what Jesus Christ and the Apostle Paul himself taught. That's BT Daily. We'll see you next time.